Hey everybody, this is TC here from Crank Revolution, and today we are talking about suspension, all things suspension for mountain bikes. So we've got forks, we've got bikes, we got shocks to talk about, we got a whole lot coming up. So first I always like to ask who is in the room, what they have specific questions for, and we only have one person in the room. So Nick, what do you have questions about for suspension?
Just looking at how to interpret what the suspension is doing,
Okay.
the terrain, and see what settings are best for
Cool.
dialing things in.
Yeah. All right, so we'll get started here. Nick's primary question was, what is a fork, what are suspension components? What are they doing? How can we adjust them? And what do we adjust? Oh, this is weird feedback now. Jeremy, what's going on here? Weird feedback now. Okay, whatever, it's live. We're just gonna go with it and I'll be able to hear myself. But so here I've got, I've got a suspension fork here. It's the RockShox Recon. All right, I just got to turn the volume down on that. I've got a suspension fork here. It's the RockShox Recon. Oh, because it usually goes to his headphones. That's why. That's where. Okay, gotcha. So here I've got a RockShox Recon solo air fork. So solo air refers to you have one air fill port, and so for this fork, that's right up here. So I have a shock pump with us. And so this allows us to put in the amount of air that we want. When we're looking at that, every fork realistically has some kind of an air chart. This one's right on the inside of the leg. And so based off of your rider weight, and that is the intended weight of you with your gear, setting your air pressure to that is a good starting point. Should be able to push through about all the travel on a hard impact, and you're not kind of leaving anything on the table. This fork I've got set up with very, very low pressure so that I can manipulate it by hand. So right now we can kind of see as we compress it, it re-expands back out. That once compressed, that re-expansion, that's the rebound. So that's the knob here on the lower leg of the fork. That allows us to kind of dial in how quickly that springs back. So right now, I think we are as fast as it will go. We'll go all the other way. So when we compress it, much slower to come back, much slower rebound. And so kind of when and how do you adjust these things? And so, that rebound, if it's too slow, you're going to have each successive impact as you're moving through something, just compressing the fork and collapsing it to zero. So you never want that. You never want that fork totally bottomed out while you're riding. You also don't want it fully extended while you're riding. You want to be floating in that in between. And so for most folks, this fork has 5 positions of adjustment for rebound. So we're just going to go straight, dead set middle. Air, we're going to keep it nice and low because otherwise you can't really see what I'm doing. And then here we have our compression damper. So the compression damper is how quickly that fork is allowed to compress. So here where we got it fully open, we get that kind of compression. Once I close that all the way off, that kind of lockout feel, it's not going. We get a little bit of platform to it, but it's really not there relative to that. And so, for a lot of folks, it's that, lock it out to climb, open it up every other moment that you're riding. With how well stuff is made nowadays, realistically, when I ride, I don't ever have my fork closed. It's always open because I paid for it. I want that suspension. I want to have a nice, smooth, comfortable bike to ride. So that very, very quickly is kind of the 3 adjustment points that are most common on most, air forks and above. What makes an air fork is that it is air sprung. So this side of the fork is your air spring, and I've got a demo fork here that I'll open up in a little bit, and you can kind of see what's going on inside of it. So here you have an air spring. Here you actually have basically your oil bath, and that's for your compression damper. What this does is it's a valve. So when the valve is fully open, oil can rush in as quickly as possible. When it's closed, that oil is shut off from pushing into the damper, so it doesn't allow it. And then effectively the rebound is the return circuit for that oil to come back from the damper into the bath. And that's kind of just how it operates, how it functions. It's really cool, in my opinion, to see what's going on within a fork. So that's what my good old trusty demo fork is. This is a fork that has not been rideable realistically for many years. It's dirty, it's old, but it actually mechanically is effectively the same as what's brand new right now. So kind of, we're going to take a look first at that air side. We'll drop the lowers, open up that air chamber, open up that oil chamber, and kind of show every part that's going on. So to start that, and this is, yeah, when you're doing fork service, this is typically the angle that you start working from. So here we've got our rebound knob. This is that rebound adjuster. So removing that allows us to get access to what's holding the lower leg together with the upper. And so 5 mil with a hammer, knock that. And so that is breaking that connection point between the lower and the stanchion free. There's one. Now we go to the air side. This one's, because it's actually an older dual air fork, you do have an air fill port on this side, but thankfully they've gone away from that because they saw way too many. So every solo air fork has 2 air chambers. Nothing works if it's just a single air chamber. And so with that dual air chamber, so you set up your positive pressure up here and your negative pressure was down here. That's in the stanchion of the fork. However, because so few people knew what they had and how it was meant to work, so often people would just fill the positive chamber and not the negative, and it would not ride nicely. So I'm going to break that part free. Typically, you need a lot more force to break those things free. I might have prepped this already. So, well, good old garbage can, always necessary for fork service. So now we're going to turn the fork back down, and we're going to pull the lowers off. So we now have our lowers and our uppers separated. We'll just hang those there nicely. There should be a couple milliliters, about 5 to 15, depending on which fork and fork manufacturer you're using, of float fluid. That's fluid that's sitting in the lowers that's bouncing up and re-wetting the wipers here, which are wiping the seal, they're the dust wiper dust seals for our air side. This fork, which I've obviously started taking apart already, here's our air cap. That's the upper air cap. So the one person that we have in class today can look in and you see nothing. It's just a hole. Because really there is nothing there except for the air piston, which you only see the top of. And so now that we've got that opened up, now let's pull the bottom of that air spring. So snap ring pliers come in. Actually, this is starting to get a little oily. I'm gonna put my gloves on. Gloves are always a good idea when working with nasty, messy things. Not only for keeping your hands clean, there's a lot of cancer-causing and caustic things that exist in suspension components and other bike parts. So things that you don't want on your hands, don't want absorbed into your skin, and some people have negative reactions to them. So, best thing, wear gloves. All right. So we're gonna poke that spring. Come on. This part I haven't gone to yet today, so. Okay. So basically, yeah, there's a small plastic guide that holds the snap ring in place. And I'm fighting against it, but I've almost got it loose. Still not. Jeez. So we could hear ourselves earlier, Mr. Lamb.
Sorry, a second.
We could hear ourselves from the iPad. It was playing the audio, so I don't know if that's something that was intended or not. There we go. All right, I guess there was a little bit of air that snuck into the negative chamber that I hadn't leaked out previously, and that's what was causing our issue. So, circlip comes out, that's what's holding in the rest of the air piston. That little pop there, yeah, there was a little bit of positive pressure in that negative chamber. So, this is what's moving through, and actually everybody can understand now that if you look down, there's nothing. Just a big old hole. Look that into the camera. So yeah, this is the extent of what your air piston is. So effectively, this is inside of that stanchion there. This is your upper cap. So this is creating that airtight seal up top. The circlip here is holding everything in an airtight seal at the bottom. And below this and above that, that's your positive chamber, negative chamber for your air. So yeah, it's a pretty simple design. As the fork compresses, this pushes up and increases the positive pressure here and lowers the negative pressure there, allowing it to pull back down. That's that kind of push and pull that allows for air suspension to ride smoothly. What makes air compression really, really, really nice relative to like a coil spring, for example, is that a coil spring has a totally linear travel path. And so that as you compress it twice as much, it's still a linear kind of growth rate in terms of the amount of force required. Air, on the other hand, has an exponential growth rate. We can talk about volume and all of these fun physics and math terms, but just so as you progress further through that fork, the amount of resistance grows exponentially as opposed to linearly. So you're able to get much higher kind of feedback, much higher stiffness from an air fork than a coil fork, unless you have an absurdly high coil spring rate, which you can't really push through. So that's what's going on the air side here. Very simple kind of air spring. With the newer stuff, like we talked about how it being a solo air, but still having two chambers, what they have is a bypass, so that where this sits at rest, inside of the fork, there's a dimple that allows air to normalize as you fill it. That gives you that kind of dual chamber setup that is constantly also, as the fork goes back to zero, re-leveling. So if you're losing air, it's not going to have one chamber super positive, one super negative. It's always going to be pretty even between them. So that is the air side of a fork. Now on to the oil side. This one, oh, I forgot one of my tools. Miss Lamb, could you grab me a tool, please? Okay. So yeah, missing the small adjustment there, but actually I can just bypass it by removing the oil damper. I need it's like a 1 or a 2.
You need a 1 or a 2?
Yeah, one of the small, might be a 1.5, but I can get without it. So we're gonna pull that damper cartridge off, assuming that I can. No, so I gotta pull that cap off. But so yeah, on the other side you'll see we're gonna pour out the oil and measure it into our graduated cylinder here. But so yeah, that's a very quick explanation of what an air fork is and showing of what an air fork is. Do you have questions about what we've just done? No? Do you have a high level of understanding of what we've just talked about? And that's fine. Yeah, this is a much more elevated level, like high science class, where I get to talk about kind of the specificity of like all the high-end stuff of what things are and how they work. And it's something where, yeah, do you need to know this? Absolutely not. But you showed up to the class, so we may as well talk about try and teach as much as possible. And so that is a 1. Up. All right. And so we're going to pull our gate cover off. Bump, there goes that. Here comes compression nut. Bump. That's fine, it's not going anywhere. All right. And so now we're going to pull that oil damper out and give everyone a look as to what that looks like. Yeah, there are a lot of different tools that make doing this kind of work much easier. And when you don't have those and you get creative, like using a cone wrench, it works, but never ideal. All right, so we're gonna get the damper cartridge out here. So yeah, this was, if you remember, when it was all together, that kind of lockout compression damper side. So this is that kind of oil valve allowing oil to move through it, and that's what's kind of regulating how quickly that fork compresses when taking an impact, when pushing against the ground. Suspension is always important, not just for the positive, in terms of things that are coming that are, rocks, rips, and bumps, things that are vertical, but also the negative. Why you always want that fork to be sagged in, to have some level of compression to begin with, is because as you're riding, the ground is not flat, and you want to maintain tire contact as long as possible. Well, so if the fork is able to elongate and maintain contact on the ground, that's ideal relative to solely and only pushing out. So here is the, this is the black box with carbon cap, black box compression damper. So basically, this is that, get my cap back up off the ground here, and we can kind of see here as we're dialing in that level of compression, we're seeing that kind of valve, that port open and close. So this is fully closed, and that is fully open. I would hand this around, but we can all understand that it's rather oily, so we're just gonna kind of set that aside. But yeah, so that is what is sitting on the top of this here, and we're about to pour out that oil. So in the top of this here, that is regulating how quickly that fork can compress and what kind of, quote unquote, lockout you have. Let's drop that in the lower there real quick, but we'll remember where that is. Now, I know this fork does not have enough oil in it, because every time I do this class, I do it like this, where I'm dropping quite a bit into the garbage can. But so just for frame of reference, this is fairly clean oil. Usually it is some kind of dyed, mostly kind of like pink is what a lot of the RockShox stuff is. But so yeah, here we have, and yeah, I can sit here for the next 45 minutes or whatever we have left in class and just let this oil drip by drip. But we're 88 milliliters. That's what we have in here. This fork probably needed about 110 to get that full lockout. But yeah, it's been a number of years and a bit of abuse. So we're gonna go back to putting the fork horizontal. You'll definitely see some oil leaking out as it chooses to. We've got another one of those circlips here. And this is gonna show us kind of the rebound, the reverse side of when the fork is compressed, how does it come back to being expanded again? So there's that other circlip again. And then, yep, there goes the oil. Wow. Oh yeah. Yeah, so I guess I've done this quite a bit and oil's gotten all over the place. But then here's that rebound. And so as we're dialing this in here, this one, it's pretty small to see. All right, yeah. Can't really tell what's going on. Trying to see if I can, yeah. But so this is then that rebound and rebound adjustment spring that you're working with. So yeah, that is a fully disassembled upper. Yeah, so this is what's referred to as a CSU. This is your crown, this is your steer, and this is your upper. This is, don't mind the compression damper that we dropped in there. So upper, lower, stanchions, CSU. But so yeah, that is a fully disassembled fork. And then yeah, normally if we were doing a fork service, we would change out all of the O-rings, change out all the wipers and bumpers, and put it all back together. But that is for another day in another class, because I think as important as it is to know exactly what's going on within a fork, what's more important is how it works, what it's doing, what that means, and what that translates to your ride. So now we're going to talk about setting up your bike and your ride. Cool. All right. Garbage can gets out of the way. So first bike that we're going to start with is a Specialized Epic Evo Comp. So this is a bike that I have a version of that I really like. I think it's one of the best Midwest mountain bikes that you can own. I'm going to cover this, make sure that we keep that dropper post nice and clean in case any oil got in there. All right. All right, so now in terms of setting up this fork, this bike. So I weigh, my rider weight, about 175. So if I was setting this up for myself, we are looking at, so they have 160 to 180 and 73 to 87 PSI. So in that 14 PSI range is where we'll set that up. So open up that air cap. And this is something that basically anybody can do, first ride out, pretty quickly. I can show you how to get all this stuff set up. So first ride out, trusty small shock pump on. And yeah, we're going with that 73 to 87 PSI range. So we are at 60 right now. I do like a fork that's a little bit stiffer, so I'm going to go up to that 85, we'll say. Boom. All right, so we're at 85 there. When you're taking a shock pump off, don't worry about the air that you hear leak as you're unthreading it. That is unless you let it linger right at that point where the valve's open, that's really just the air that's internal within the hose escaping. So don't put it on, take it off, put it on, take it. Don't worry too much about that. Yeah, it's kind of always going to happen because there's air in the hose. The air in the hose has to get out. So boom, put this back on there. Like I said, my compression I always like full open. So I've got that fully open. And then rebound. It's today was, I mean, if it was a rideable day, it would have been pretty dry. So I run, let's see, basically, and how do you count where your rebound is? So you want to get a number for how many clicks you have. This one has quite a bit. So we are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 20, okay, 25 clicks. So there's middle. And then I'll go 4 up from middle. That's where I typically like my rebound to be set. So I have my fork set ready to ride. Now when it comes to the shock, conversation's kind of the same. The one thing that makes the shock different is your air pressures that you're going to talk about. A lot of Specialized stuff used to have what was called auto sag, and it was a very quick kind of return rate. For once you would set this up, it would allow the air to bleed out and kind of normalize for, generally speaking, for that size rider. A good place to start is 1-to-1. Whatever your rider weight is, go 1-to-1 with that pressure, with the pressure in the shock. A lot of shocks at this point now do have, air charts. They'll tell you, hey, if you're this weight, approximately this range. But also, yeah, for a just general guide, 1-to-1 is always safe. This being the Epic Evo, it has 120 mil of travel up front, and if I'm remembering this correctly, it's 100 mil out back. And so, yeah, got my set at that 175. Once again, compression, which is this knob here, is going to be full open, which is where it is. And then rebound here, 1, 3, 4, 5, 6. 8, 9. Okay, So we get 10 clicks. So we'll go to fast, +2. Cool, so I have this all kind of tuned up to ride for, generally speaking, how I like it to ride. One of the things that we haven't talked yet about is sag. So sag is that, that's what, on the fork here, that's what this is. This is your phonometer, but it's also a good way to measure what your sag is. So basically, when you have everything kind of tuned and started up and you're about to go ride, you can mount the bike, and when you mount the bike, you'll sag into it. So you will exhibit pressure onto the fork, and this will then move up slightly based on where you set it to. And so this is adjusted, your sag is adjusted by adjusting the air side. So if you put more air in, you'll have less sag. You take more air out, you'll have more sag. And that sag is that, that negative starting point for the fork, so it's able to elongate, so it's able to maintain traction better on the trail. And so, yeah, by having that tuned and set, you're able to have a smoother, more efficient ride. And so I have this bike set how I would want to ride it. For me, that's usually about 15 to 20% sag. With cross-country bikes, down-country bikes, in that shorter 100 to 120 millimeter travel range, you're going to find that any more sag than that is going to lead to you're just going to bottom it out, or you're going to have such a stiff compression on that where it's just going to be rock hard fork. And that's the thing with so much of tuning a bike is tuning your bike, and how do you tune your bike? We are blessed here with mountain bike trails that are across the street and mountain bike trails that have good small loops. So the best way to figure out how to tune your fork or your bike is to have a shock pump, and some people like to have a written journal, and pick out one of the loops here that's short 1 to 2 miles and lap it. And then change one variable and lap it again, and then change it. And so for kind of when I was learning what this stuff did and how did it feel and what did that translate to me, the best thing that I could do was, go out with a shock pump and go run a lap at 80 PSI. Go run a lap at 90 PSI. Go run a lap at 70 PSI. By changing just that one variable each time, you're able to kind of internalize and vocalize better what it is that you feel when you're riding. A RockShop employee once told me during a training session that the phonometer, basically, you want to bottom that out once, maybe twice a ride. You want to use all of your suspension, all of your travel. If you're never using all of it, then you're tuned generally too stiff. If you're using it all the time, then it's too light. And you always want to find that kind of what's going to be the best way to maximize the amount of suspension that you have and what you're using. You paid for it, it's nice, let's use it. And so, if this is always floating here, cool. You definitely want to reevaluate kind of where that shock, how that fork are kind of set up so that you can get more out of it. And so once you kind of start to get a good idea as to what you've got, how it's working, and what you're trying to do with it, it allows you to free up how you ride, what you ride, and you'll be a more talented rider, a more you're able to ride at a higher level because you know what to expect out of your components, out of your bike. Any questions, sir?
So your pressure may be different both trail to trail or even on the same trail depending on conditions?
Yeah, and so that was a great, next question was, your pressure will be different trail to trail, or your settings will be different trail to trail, condition to condition. Absolutely true. One of the scariest lessons I've learned on a mountain bike, I've learned a lot of lessons on mountain bikes, and most of them are scary. One of the scariest is, when I talk about rebound, my best example for when do you slow down your rebound, when is too fast. If your rebound's too fast, once you compress it fully down, it can throw you back. It can buck you off the bike. It can also, if you compress it, super fast, or compress it and it's rebounding super fast. Let's say you're going over a wet route, for example. Well, that wood is very slick when it's wet. And so if you have high rebound going over something like that, you can have traction on the dirt, and then the moment you get onto that log, get onto that route, it can eject the fork. Where the fork, because the fork is pushing so hard against the ground, that once the ground that has now changed to a root is that you can just lose your front end traction. It's terrifying. It's not fun. And it's ones where you're going along, you've ridden that, you're solid, and then you go down to something, you go slightly off camera and just ejects the fork, and you can dump it and be off in a bad way. So yeah, that's the typical thing that I say around here. When it's wet out, if you are riding and you're able to ride, trails close when it's wet here very quickly, just turn your rebound slightly down. Just turn it down. For me, it's 20%. So if I've got 10 clicks and I go, 2 up from midpoint, and I go, 2 midpoint exactly. And it's kind of understanding, what you have, how many clicks you have. If you never remember these numbers, just remember you can always start and click in one direction. Okay, cool. In looking at this here, yeah, towards the fast side, we are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 11, 12 clicks. So it's always that, you can always kind of find where you're at. And by counting and going step by step, you can say, I was here, I went there, I went back to this. It allows you that flexibility of, always knowing where you're at in terms of your tune. And so that when I take in, as a mechanic, when I take in a bike for suspension tune-up, suspension repair, anything that I'm going to be disassembling and taking the air out, the first notes that I take are what was the rider's set air, where was their compression set, where was their rebound set. So that allows me the ability to put it back to where it came in at. Yeah, that's important. It's something that's often missed, often skipped. So that is how I set my suspension on a Epic Evo. I also have a specialized stump jumper here. This gets into more of the nuance of what mountain bikes are today, where this bike has 120 millimeters of travel here. If we're not familiar with what that quick explanation is, you can always measure how much travel you have. So you grab a ruler and you line it up at the top of the dust wiper and then to the top of the stanchion. And just look at it. Oh, it's 120 mil. So this one actually measures from that to that, 120 millimeters. And so longer travel bikes are better for more aggressive terrain. Bigger downhills, bigger mountains, things like that require slightly more travel, because if you have, here in Illinois, we talk about a big descent being about a minute. And I understand that in saying that, that's really a joke to a lot of the mountain bike world, because, well, descents really don't get good until they're like 30 minutes long. Then they're way fun. So now we've got this specialized stump jumper. And so this one we can see, if we remember how the amount of travel on that Epic that we had, we can line this one up, which was also, this is 100 mil travel. We can see just how much shorter this is, how much less room you have to work with, how much more room you have to work with there. And so on the longer travel bikes, you get a lot more kind of flexibility in how you want to attack a problem. Yes, you're still going to set sag, you're still going to set your rebound adjustment and your compression adjustment. This being an S-Works level bike, you have both high speed and low speed compression. This is where my knowledge base is not as good. Basically, low speed is small bump, high speed is big bump, big hit compression. And so, yeah, I understand how this works. This compression damper, I understand how it works because it's really a one-way valve. It's pretty straightforward. The dual speed, I don't know. I'm assuming you've got you got a larger valve and a small one, and they both are individually adjustable, but it's kind of closer to magic for me in there. Because yeah, there's a lot, and if this stuff was simple, it'd be on every bike. Because it's not simple, because it's higher level, it is a higher level of engineering and construction. But so yeah, typically what we talk about when we talk about a lockout, that's the high speed compression, which is what the majority of all forks have. And then that low speed compression is only on the higher end models. And that's kind of dialing in that smaller bump, that smaller fluttering, more to say. When you have a longer travel bike, one of the things that I learned is that, yeah, we look at, kind of that air spring, that air rate, and as it increases, you get kind of more fluctuation in how you want to attack a problem. So one of the things that I had once riding at Deer Valley, I was noticing that my fork was effectively collapsing by the end of an exit on a very large berm, 35 miles an hour into this large 180 U-turn, and by the end of it, my fork would be fully compressed. My initial thought was to add more air, that I was sagging in too much, that I was allowing it, but one of my good friends who is a suspension technician was like, hey, you can just dial in your compression, slow your compression just a little bit, and that'll kind of give it where it's not able to collapse as quickly. And that's ultimately what I did, which definitely helped how I, helped that ride. And so it's kind of because, every time that you're kind of pushing through that travel, you're not only engaging the air side, you're also engaging the compression damper, you're also engaging the rebound. So you have all of those three things to kind of work through to dial in exactly how you want it to feel in that moment. Yes, it is something that you're not going to be adjusting your rebound whilst riding the bike. You need to get off of the bike to reach down there. It's very dangerous to reach down at the bottom of the fork while pedaling. So that's something that it's not as, not as important as quick to make that adjustment. Because you can always do rebound from here. Air, you definitely need to get off and put a pump onto that. But there's a lot of different ways to adjust and tune what this is. The best thing that I can leave, that we can leave here today with is having, hey, I know what these things do in principle. I know what I can adjust to change my style of riding. And I have a plan for for figuring out, one, where I'm at. What is your starting, where have you been riding? What is your fork PSI? It's always fun when somebody brings in a fork for me to work on and I ask them a question like that, and I don't know. Because so many of us, got it set at the shop or just grabbed the bike and started riding and have never thought about how much air pressure is in my fork. But it is something where if you want to know more and have a better riding experience, understanding where you're at, where you're trying to go makes a big difference. So yeah, where are you at? So where is your air pressure set? And so every shock pump is going to have a pressure gauge on it. If you don't own one, I highly recommend purchasing one. Every local bike shop should have them. If everyone goes out and buys it, we're all going to sell out. So, give us time to re-up. But yeah, be patient. So yeah, where is your pressure at? Where is your rebound at? Where is your compression at? If you understand those three things, and then next time you go out to the trails, you bring a shock pump with you, and you kind of start testing, each lap kind of where you want to be, where you want to go. That'll get you to a much more consistent way of riding, much more consistent way of understanding what your bike can do and how you can ride your bike. And it makes it a lot more fun. Living out west between rock and drop and all these different kind of features that you have, this is a lot. It's critical. It's mission critical. If you can't ride a fork that's poorly tuned out in the more extreme conditions. Here in Illinois, your fork can be collapsed and you can still totally ride around and not have a totally detrimental experience. But it's something where, understanding what this does, how it works, how to adjust it, what it's doing for you makes a huge difference. Then also starts to understand what makes one fork better than another. What's the upgrade? What are you buying into? What are you getting with that? Because if you go from having a low-end coil spring and a mechanical damper to a hydraulic damper with an air spring, that's a huge step up in what the fork, how much you're able to adjust, what you're able to dial in and make it do. So yeah, that's kind of a big part of what is going on in here. We will talk more in depth about forks specifically. I'll go through where I actually put one of these back together and kind of going through that practice, because taking it apart is one step, putting it back together is a whole nother one. And then, this is something that, I went through a lot of information very, very, very quickly. I tried to do it multiple times, but at the same time, this stuff takes a while to internalize and understand. 3 times is typically the number for me. If I hear something 3 times, then I know it. And so, I'll be doing another class similar to this after, in the next year, where we will hopefully get to a higher level of understanding about this. Cool. Any questions, sir?
So then what's the purpose of a volume spacer?
Yeah, there we go. All right, so next question was, what's the purpose of a volume spacer? Volume spacer, a volume reducer, is, so basically in that conversation of your air spring, solo air spring here. So a volume spacer, a volume reducer, reduces the volume of air. It's always fun to just say the answer back in slow motion, but that's really what it does. So what it does is that modern air forks, this is not one, have a threaded underside of their air cap, which allows you to thread on those volume reducers. So that is it's just a piece of plastic that shrinks the amount of air that's inside of that positive chamber so that it ramps up more quickly. If you think about that, exponential curve graph, it then starts higher. So it ramps up faster, it starts at a higher, ramps up to a higher pressure much more quickly because of the smaller volume. So volume reducers are most common for larger riders, because a larger rider is going to need that higher pushback, higher air spring sooner. And so that's how they, that's where they kind of come in. There are also air charts for those based on rider weight, what to use. RockShox does a really nice job of that. But something where, once it's only really, you find it to be necessary once, you're a larger rider and you're constantly pushing through your travel on the fork and you're near kind of maxing out your beginning pressure, or you just want it to kind of tune in your ride and ride feel. I know someone that has cut a volume spacer in half, and it's one of the only people that I would say, like, oh, that makes perfect sense, because this dude is super fast, and I can understand that the difference of one spacer to two spacers is more than he wants. One's too little, two's too much, 1.5 is just right. It's that kind of Goldilocks zone. And that's entirely how it works. It's just a piece of plastic that, as it exists, it reduces the volume of air that's available, and the fork reacts differently because of that. Something that, as a generally lighter rider, I've never needed, but I understand why they exist, and they do work in a good way. But and once again, not as common in the Midwest. That's where unfortunately all of this passion that I have for suspension technology, I get to practice it so infrequently out here because I'll ride a fully rigid bike at times too. So that's a good question though. Thank you. If you don't have any more questions, I am kind of tired and kind of spent. That's a lot of information, and I know it's a lot of information, and we'll do it again. I'll get better at my presentation. We'll get better at kind of understanding what's going on in here. Because this is something that is, if you wanted to solely be a physics professor, lecture, I can call people and get somebody in here to do that, but it's not English at that point. It's very technical speak. This is trying to find that good balance of it has to be technical because these parts are pretty technically important, but at the same time, it just has to work. So
That's you with your pack, but it wouldn't include a water bottle in your cage.
And this is one where, sure. I mean, technical, water is going to be a variable that's going to change throughout a ride it's going to change location. It's a starting point. All of this stuff, everything that we just kind of went through is a starting point. And the best thing that I can recommend for you is to get a shock pump and start running laps. And just go through, and because once you understand, okay, cool, I felt this, but is this that, or is this, my example of losing that, having my fork collapse through that berm. Do I up my air pressure? But that's going to, not just in that one moment, that's going to affect every single part of that run. Okay, if I just turn my compression down 2 notches, is that going to be too stiff through a rock garden? Is that going to be, and it's kind of one of those where you can't. There is no, this is the answer. This is one answer to it. There's multiple other options that you can change as well. How do we make it work best for you? And that's kind of the best thing, is that kind of step-by-step practice. So once you go through and understand what things generally do, what things do in principle, then you have a better plan for what to adjust as you are experimenting. And then once you've gone through that experimental phase, then you kind of get to refine and hone, and you go from, as opposed to 70, you go to 72 and 68. You kind of shrink your numbers down, shrink your scale down. Same thing goes with tire pressure. This entire conversation can also, yeah, we're talking about air springs. This is an air spring in a way. And so yeah, running a slightly lower tire pressure versus a higher tire pressure affects your ride in different ways. So kind of how do we make you the best rider that you can be? How do we make your suspension work best for you? It comes from practice and experiment. SRAM has put out quite a few interesting shock whiz, other like kind of shock tools. And it's a live sensor for your shock that's kind of giving you mathematical data of what your shock has done. They're not inexpensive. They're, I think, last I looked, $400 for a shock whiz. They also do an air whiz too. It's really kind of, for those who are data and numbers driven, it's a really great tool because it's giving you live feedback that you can't get otherwise. But it's also one where you can just get lost in the numbers and, yeah, not to be the best with it. But yeah, that is in a almost hour class as much as I can say about what suspension components are doing. For those folks who are online, I apologize. I don't have a live feed in front of me for me to be able to be reading your questions actively. So we will do a supplement where we answer all of these questions. Yeah, this is an open bike shop, and when the producer gets taken away by helping other folks on their bikes, it's kind of what happens. But yeah, thanks everybody for coming. And yeah, this is Crank Revolution Suspension Talk Part 1, we'll say. We'll definitely do a Part 2 in the new year. But yeah, thanks for everybody for showing up, and hope you all have a good day. All right. Cool. And that's still going, so let's figure out how to shut this down. Yeah, I don't know. He'll figure it out. They can watch dead air, even though I'm still mic'd up.
Deer Valley,
Yeah, Deer Valley's great.
did you lose compression when you adjusted that setting for the rest of the run?
So, yeah, we had a 15-point compression adjustment. So going 1 or 2 notches did not affect really my feel for the rest of the ride. Only I wasn't bottoming out. And that was a hard right-hander, bridge crossing, hard right-hander. You kind of hop down, and then you've got this 10-foot step up. And so I was coming into that just in a really bad way. Yeah. And so that allowed me to ride that much better. But it's fun when you're out riding with suspension techs who are at this super high level, and they're just like, no, do this. And oh, okay. Which is a very fortunate position that I got to be in. Let me see what these guys are doing over here. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Yeah, this is my partner, Chris.
Hi.
Chris, how you doing, man?
Doing well. Your name?
Joe.
Joe, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, man. I'm gonna go end that real quick.
Yeah, because I'm still live, so.
Yeah, so are you guys are the owners?
Yeah.
Nice, man. Nice place.
Thank you.
Yeah, I like it. I bought a specialized